Hey guys, welcome back to more Reddit HOA stories. In this Ripestories video, a terrible HOA Karen designated my farm as HOA community property and demanded I follow the bylaws. She then ordered me to fertilize my land and I complied with her demands to the letter. Here is why you never mess with a farmer. Let's dive right into the story. And the first one is titled, HOA Karen won't stop trespassing my farm, so I set a trap and watched. So I have owned my family's farm for going on 12 years. My grandfather built it up from nothing, my dad kept it running, and when it came to me I made a promise to keep it going. It's not a massive operation, but there are rotating crops, mostly corn and soybeans, depending on the season. Nothing glamorous, but it is paid off, the deed is clean, and the land has been zoned agricultural for decades. For most of the time I've owned it, the neighbors I've had were other farmers or people who had been in the area long enough to understand what a working farm looks like. Then the subdivision went in. A developer bought up the land on the north edge of my property, old Herschel's wheat field that had sat vacant for a few years after he retired. I watched them break ground and I tried to stay optimistic. New neighbors are new neighbors. As long as I understood where the property line was, I had zero interest in anyone's business and expected the same in return. The first sign of trouble came about a month after the first residents moved in. I pulled up to the north section early one morning and found fresh footprints cutting straight through my newly tilled and seeded rows. Small heel prints, the kind someone makes wearing sneakers or sandals, not work boots. Right next to them were paw prints from what looked like a small dog, maybe two of them. Someone had walked their dog all the way across the section I had spent 2 full days tilling and seeding, and I stood there looking at the trail going through the middle of everything and felt that particular kind of tired anger you get when you know this is just the beginning of something. That same afternoon, I spotted her for the first time. She was walking along the fence line on the subdivision side with 2 small white dogs on matching pink leashes, and she was pointing at my field and talking to herself. I waved at her, she looked right at me and didn't wave back. Just kept walking, kept pointing, I didn't think much of it. Eccentric neighbor, fine, I had work to do. About a week later, I was running a second pass on the south section and I looked up and there she was. Not near the fence, mind you, not at the edge. She was standing right in the middle of my field with the dogs off leash, hands on her hips, looking around like she was inspecting her own property. I stopped the tractor, walked over and asked as calmly as I could manage if I could help her. She looked at me like I'd interrupted something. "I'm just walking," she said. I explained that she was on private agricultural land, that I had just seeded the section and that I needed her to stay off. She tilted her head and said, "The HOA charter designates this open space as shared community area for residents." I stared at her, then I said, "I'm not in your HOA. I'm not a resident of your subdivision. This is my farm and you are standing in the middle of it." She told me I was clearly confused about the community planning documents and that as HOA president she would know better than I would. Then she clicked her tongue at her dogs and walked away like the conversation had never happened to begin with. That evening, I pulled out my property documents and confirmed everything I already knew. My land is mine, clean and clear, no easements, no shared use agreements, nothing connecting my property to the subdivision in any legal way. I'm not a member of the HOA, never have been, never signed anything that would put me under their authority. I called the county the next morning to triple-check everything. The woman I spoke to was very direct. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my land, period. She actually paused for a second after I described the situation and then said, "That's a new one," which I found somewhat reassuring. I told myself that once I confronted her clearly, she would back off. Normal people, when told they are on private property, leave and then don't come back. However, Karen was not a normal person. Over the next few weeks, she started organizing group walks through my field. She would bring 5, sometimes 6 subdivision residents through the north section every morning, dogs running loose, everyone tramping through my emerging rows like it was a public park that she had personally arranged for them. I went out and addressed the group directly one morning. I was calm, I explained the situation clearly. A couple of the residents looked uncomfortable and started edging back towards the fence. However, Karen stood her ground, looked at my crops poking up through the soil, and said, "It's basically a dirt path right now. We are not hurting anything." "You're walking on my crop rows," I said. "Well, when it looks like an actual field, we will be more careful," she said and turned back to the group like the conversation was resolved. I sent her a certified mail notice after that, formal, documented, delivered to her address and signed for. It clearly stated that she and anyone she was bringing onto my property were trespassing and that the land was private agriculturally zoned property with no connection to the HOA and that I expected the trespassing to stop immediately. She then responded by slipping a typed letter under my front door 5 days later, not official paperwork mind you, just something she had typed and printed herself. The letter informed me that after a thorough review by the board, my property had been formally designated as HOA common area under their community planning guidelines, meaning residents were permitted to use it for passive recreational activities. Then it said my land was currently in violation of neighborhood standards due to its barren, unplanted, aesthetically deficient appearance, and that I was required to immediately treat and fertilize the landscape to promote lush green aesthetic growth in line with neighborhood standards. I read that letter probably 4 times. I called my lawyer the next morning and he confirmed everything I already knew. Karen's letter was completely without any legal weight. No HOA can claim jurisdiction over land that is not part of the HOA, and Karen typing something up and calling it a formal designation does not change property law. He told me that I could pursue the trespass issue through the courts and that we would have a very solid case. But here's where I was at mentally. Legal action takes months, it costs real money. And while that is all dragging out, Karen and her group are still walking through my crops every morning, getting more comfortable the longer I don't stop them. So yeah, I did not want to win eventually. I wanted this to stop and I wanted Karen to genuinely understand what she had done. I sat at my kitchen table that night with her letter in front of me and read that line again. Treat and fertilize the landscape to promote lush, green, aesthetic growth. I am a farmer. And yeah guys, with that, since we have read many stories about farmers getting revenge on entitled people, what would you suggest OP to do? Or if you were in OP's shoes, what would you have done? I mean, the key word here is fertilize the landscape and comply with Karen's demands. Also, if you still enjoy the Malicious Compliance HOA stories, then please don't forget to like the video and post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. I have farmed this land for over a decade and I know exactly what fertilizing agricultural land looks like, what it involves and what it produces, and I also know that Karen, in her absolute certainty that she could regulate my farm, had put that demand in writing. I called a commercial agricultural supplier the next morning, and what I ordered was liquid cattle manure from a regional dairy operation, not the dried composted odor-reduced kind that you can buy in bags at a garden center. No, commercial liquid manure hauled in a tanker, applied with a field spreader on the back of a tractor. It is cheap, it is highly effective, it is completely standard in commercial farming, and it is completely legal on agriculturally zoned land, and it is by every definition organic fertilizer. So it's exactly what Karen had demanded in writing. The supplier scheduled delivery for Friday morning. I asked for the tanker to arrive at 8:30 so I would have time to get everything connected, run a quick test and start on the north section by 9. I had been watching Karen's routine for weeks by this point, because she was nothing if not consistent. Every morning right around 9 o'clock she came through the gap in the fence line on the north side with both dogs. She would cut across the rows, do her loop and leave, rain or shine, 9 o'clock. Well, I spent the rest of the week going about my normal business. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, and Friday morning the tanker pulled in on time. The driver helped me get the applicator set up, and once everything was connected, he pulled his truck over to the side of the access road to wait. I climbed into the tractor and checked my watch. 8:54. The smell when the applicator runs at full capacity is something you don't forget. It is this thick, heavy presence that settles into everything around it. After years of working with it, I barely register it anymore, but I was upwind in the cab and I was thinking very clearly about how it would hit someone who walked into it from downfield. I started the first pass on a north section. I was mid-halfway through my second pass when I saw the fence line gap open on the north side. Karen came through wearing a light blue matching athletic set, jacket and pants, this time without her dogs but with sunglasses on, and she was not in a hurry. She walked into my field with the exact same confidence she had walked into it every single morning for weeks before. I kept the tractor moving. She was maybe 30 feet in before it hit her, and I watched her slow down. She looked around, then she looked at the ground, and then she looked up and registered the tractor and the applicator operating ahead of her and to the right. At that point, any reasonable person turns around and walks back out, but Karen turned sideways and started walking quickly along the edge of the field, apparently thinking she could cut around the spray zone and get to the far side where she usually walked. The applicator on a commercial field spreader has a wide arc. That's the whole point of it, really. It's designed to cover as much ground as efficiently as possible in each pass. She got maybe 15 feet before it reached her. I heard her over the engine. I brought the tractor to a stop and climbed down. She was standing in the middle of my north section, absolutely soaked. She was holding her arms out away from her body and her mouth was open, and she was making a sound I can only describe as prolonged disbelief. The light blue athletic set she was wearing had taken on a significantly different character. "What is wrong with you?" she screamed the second I was close enough. I stopped a solid distance back, upwind, and kept my voice completely steady, saying, "I'm fertilizing the field just like you asked me." "You waited for me. You did this on purpose. I'm calling the police right now." I reached into my jacket pocket and held up her letter. I'd kept it there since Wednesday. "You sent me this letter," I said. "It instructs me to treat and fertilize the landscape immediately, so I'm doing that. I'm in compliance with you." She was already on her phone. I walked back to my tractor and finished the east portion of the north section while I waited because I had a schedule. Well, 2 deputies showed up about 25 minutes later. Karen was standing at the edge of the field near the fence gap, still completely drenched. Both deputies were working very hard to look professional about the smell. She went through her version of events immediately, and I let her finish. She told them that I had deliberately attacked her, that I had timed the operation to hit her, and that I was conducting illegal activities on what she called community recreational land. The first deputy looked at me and said, "What's your side of this?" I handed him 3 things: my deed, the county confirmation of agricultural zoning that I'd gotten weeks earlier, and Karen's written letter demanding that I fertilize the landscape. I explained that I'd been running a standard manure application on my own agricultural property and that Karen had walked into the field while it was actively operating, despite receiving formal written notice that my land was private and that she needed to stay off of it. The deputy read the letter, he looked at Karen, and he looked back at the letter. The second deputy had moved to a position several feet away that I noticed was significantly upwind and appeared to be reviewing the zoning documentation very thoroughly. "Ma'am," the first deputy said, "he is operating agricultural equipment on agricultural land. That is legal." "He knew I was coming," she said. "He planned this." "You walked onto his private property," he said. "He has been doing standard farm operations on land that, from everything we can see here, has nothing to do with your HOA." She started explaining the community designation again, and he held up a hand. "What you believe about the property does not really change what the deed says. You need to take that up through civil court if you want to pursue it. What I can tell you is, though, that we cannot act on an HOA board decision about land that is not under that HOA's jurisdiction." She looked at me, and she genuinely looked like she couldn't process what was happening here. She said, "You have not heard the last of this." I said, "You're still on my property," and she left. One of the deputies heading back to his vehicle caught my eye and quietly suggested I keep documenting everything going forward. I was already doing that. The letters continued for a little while after that. Karen sent one claiming that I'd created a public health hazard and violated environmental standards with my application of the manure. She threatened me with daily fines. My lawyer sent a formal response directly to the HOA's official address, not Karen personally, addressed to the board as a whole. It outlined the property situation clearly, documented the trespass history, and made plain that any further attempts to impose fines or restrictions on legally operating agricultural land outside the HOA jurisdiction would result in legal action for them. That letter reached people Karen had apparently not been keeping fully informed. 2 of the other board members contacted me within a week separately, and both conversations went roughly the same way. They ended up apologizing to me. They told me the full board had never officially voted to designate my property as a community space, and that Karen had been acting on her own authority without proper board approval. One of them had been on the board for several years and was pretty frank about the fact that this was not the first time Karen had made decisions, and then presented them as board approved after the fact. I told both of them that I appreciated the call, but that an apology didn't undo weeks of crop damage, and that what I needed was for the trespassing to stop completely and permanently. It stopped, and within about 2 days of the lawyer's letter going out, nobody was coming through my field anymore. Not Karen, not the group she'd been organizing, nobody. What I pieced together later was that Karen had told people in the subdivision her version of the manure morning, framing it as me attacking her deliberately, but by that point the residents she had been bringing on those walks had received a copy of my lawyer's letter and understood pretty clearly that they had been trespassing on private property the entire time based on Karen's word alone. Suddenly, the community green space story was not holding up so well with an audience that now understood it could expose them to a trespass lawsuit. About 3 weeks after the manure application, Karen resigned from the board. I found this out through a neighbor who buys eggs from me, mentioned it in passing one Saturday morning. She said Karen had stepped down, said there were other disagreements involved, but that the whole farm situation had made a lot of people in the subdivision uncomfortable with how Karen had been running things all along. And the next one is a beautiful malicious compliance story, which is titled Weekend Warriors. And let me tell you guys, you don't want to miss this one. So about 10 years ago, I worked for a local company that sold power equipment. Most of our clients were landscapers and contractors who either bought or had equipment repaired regularly. We knew all our regulars. It was a great place to work, partly because the owner and our manager had a zero-tolerance policy for customers and clients who were sexist towards female employees. They supported us, trained us well, and didn't gaslight us when we had to deal with jerks. For the most part, our regulars were great, but the weekend warrior DIY guys were terrible. Most of them had more money than sense and did not need anything we sold for their home projects. One summer though, we had hired a young woman to help on the sales floor on the weekend. She was still in college and kind of lacked confidence. She was great, she had an AG background, and she just did not know our products yet. One Saturday morning, she got stuck with a weekend warrior who wanted to buy a mower. He was looking at something ridiculous like a commercial-grade zero-turn Hustler with a 54-inch deck. He was not mowing acreage, he didn't have a farm, he lived in the suburbs. She took him outside to look at some of the mowers, and before long we could hear him yelling. The manager hurried outside. I was working on a special order when she came back into the store, trying not to angry cry. The owner told her to take a break. The manager finished the sale, and the man then had to go somewhere else to buy a trailer to haul it home because he had not planned for that part. When the dust had settled, I asked the manager what happened, and he said the man started yelling, calling her a dumb bitch because she didn't know how to turn on the mower and had offered to go get someone else. The fact that he was asking the question indicated he also didn't know how to turn on the mower. Well, I'm no longer shocked at the number of people who will drop thousands of dollars on things they don't even know how to use. Later that day, the owner came over to me, sighed heavily, and told me the guy had called demanding we mail him a copy of the manual because he didn't get one. All of the manuals and links to repairs and parts for all the products we sold were on our website, but no, he wanted a hard copy because he had already been insulted enough and shouldn't have to find it himself. When I brought up the manual, it was 90 pages long, 45 pages in English and 45 pages in Spanish. Well, I printed off the Spanish copy and left it for the mailman. I told the owner what I did when I arrived at work the next day, and he just started laughing. When the guy called to complain, the owner apologized and told him a lot of our clients speak Spanish, so we didn't want to assume people only spoke English. Last but not least, the guy returned the mower. We are pretty sure he couldn't even figure out how to get it off the trailer. We sold it a week later to a landscaping company. And the next one is a beautiful petty revenge story, which is titled Go Back on Your Word for a £100 Promise? Well, then lose a £40,000 sale. So several years back I was looking to buy a new car, something a bit faster and more fitting for my love of driving. While looking around I was genuinely pricing up a new Civic Type R instead of saving for a deposit on a house. This is when I came across a local dealership who had a heavily modified Fiesta ST2. It is a small local dealership run by one guy who mostly acts as a sort of sales broker for people struggling to sell privately. I contacted the dealer and arranged a test drive during my lunch break that week. I got in, and as I started it up, a warning popped up on the dash saying, "Type pressure sensors not installed." I queried this with the dealer and he said not to worry and it would be sorted by the time I bought the car, as it had just come in and they hadn't been able to do their usual touch-ups. Fair enough, on with the test drive. Well, I pretty much fell in love within 5 minutes, and long story short, I traded my old car in to buy it a few weeks later. When I came to collect the keys, I got in the car, and what do you know, the same warning message has come up. I turned the car off and head back inside to talk to the dealer, and he claims that he never agreed to that, and it's only £100 to get them installed, and gave me the contact details for a local garage. He only said he would get them installed verbally, so I didn't have any proof. Needless to say, I was pissed. Over the next 4 years I loved the car, got the sensors installed and told everybody that story and to stay clear of him as he's a liar and generally does not treat you well after he's gotten your money. At the 4-year mark, I was once again looking for a new car as I had definitely outgrown the Fiesta. This time I was in the market for an Audi RS3 2018 or newer with a budget of around £40,000. I checked all the local dealerships, but none of them had anything like that, except for the same dealership I bought the Fiesta from. I contacted them about it and once again arranged a test drive. Went on the test drive, had a good time, but honestly, I was not 100% sold. He asked me what I thought and I lied and said that I loved it, apart from the silver trim on the front. To nobody's surprise, he said he could get that changed if I agreed to the sale today. I could not hide the massive grin on my face when I said, "No thank you, I've heard that one before from you," and that turned out to be a lie. There was a moment of confusion, followed by an obvious realization with a hint of regret. I left without buying the car, despite his best efforts trying to cut me a deal as an apology. The fact was, I simply did not want to give this guy my money. I then went to another dealership and ended up buying a brand new A35, which I've still got to this day, and I absolutely love it. And the next one is a beautiful petty revenge story, which is titled "Discovered by accident that my ex-fiancé is still using my employee discount." So I called my ISP today for generic Wi-Fi troubleshooting triage and inadvertently discovered that my employee discount is apparently still being used by my ex-fiancé at our former residence, which I was not aware he was still residing at. Anyway, the representative asked me if I would like to terminate the discount at the former residence and if I would like to have it applied to my current address instead. So why yes? Yes, I would, kind sir, thank you very much. To make it clear, this is a man who believed banging his fist against walls was acceptable behavior and who also attempted to force me into doing stuff I didn't like on another occasion. Even when I declined and said no, he still tried to force me to do that and went on a tirade about how I owed him intercourse. Dude is not exactly suffering financially either. He earns over $160,000 per year in salary, an additional $3,000 per month from a side hustle that only eats up a few hours per month, and another $1.5K per month in profit from an investment property, and also recently pocketed over $100K from the sale of another property. But he can afford an extra $10 per month for internet service. While I earn a comfortable salary, I also have a medical condition that has me on regular immunotherapy treatments, whereas he is totally healthy and able-bodied. I also work far longer hours than he does, not to mention I'm in a far more stressful profession than he is. One small additional step towards administrative closure and course correction, one small recalibration in the ecosystem of righting wrongs. And yeah guys, thanks for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.